So welcome to Surrey Poultry Vets Reducing Red Mites webinar, part of the Hens Hints webinar series. So if you enjoyed this webinar, then please have a look at my website. You might find that the introduction to chicken health courses are of interest to you. There's some more being designed as we speak. and there's also a veterinary CPD course available on there as well. And do subscribe to me on Facebook, on Instagram, where I put regular chook challenges, and have a look at my website if you're interested or require some advice or consultation. And I can work with your current vet as well if they're not if they're not poultry inclined. So our guest speakers tonight are going to be Katie Pitman from MSD Technical Services and also Wesley Thorne, MSD's account manager. Here's a lovely picture of a red mite there. You can see the blood oozing out of it. Delicious. So by the end of this webinar, you should be able to identify a red mite in your flock and also update or amend your coop and redesign it to really reduce those red mite populations. We'll also talk about the options for prevention and treatment of red mite and how a vet could help as well. So identifying the right time for a vet, well, as soon as red mite get out of control, then you're potentially, those birds are going to be anemic. And anemic birds are not able to mount normal immune responses, so they'll be more susceptible to disease. So controlling red mite is really, really important. So now we're going to join Wesley, who was talking about the red mite.
Just regarding the red mite being a vector, the red mite can feed from one bird and then potentially transmit disease from that one bird to the next as they bite, and it will transmit various different poultry diseases and zoonotic diseases like salmonella, but for poultry, poultry can suffer with things like mycoplasmas, E. coli, and the salmonella, as I've already mentioned. The infestation rate in Europe is regarded to be around about 85%, but that was a study that was conducted in 2005. In the UK, it was over 90% at that point. It's worth probably mentioning to people that red mite are endemic in the wild bird population. So it will be in sparrows, pigeons. It will be in the vicinity of your poultry coop, and if you've got potentially food sources there for wild birds to also sort of be attracted to your coop, there's always a risk there that red mite may come at some point to your coop, even if it was a brand new coop and the birds were clean initially. So it's worth keeping an eye out.
Yeah, I think that's why I find it unlike when people say they've never actually had red mite. I think it's probably more likely that they've never had a problem infestation and any clinical disease and not noticed it, because the majority of backyard birds will be exposed to their natural hosts. Yeah.
If people have never seen the red mite as well, we've got a few pictures later, but essentially they're about the size of a full stop. If you've got a biro pen and you did a full stop on a piece of paper, they're about that sort of size. When they've fed and they're engorged, they've had a blood meal, they grow a bit like a tick, if people sort of relate to that, and they'll be a lot darker and physically larger. When they're younger, before they have a blood meal, they can be sort of clear or translucent in colour, but generally you would see them as these sort of little black specks on the wood or on the coop itself, or potentially on the eggs if you've got a significant number in that pen. There is obviously, in commercial terms, if they are infested in that flock, it will reduce appetite, reduce performance of the birds, and that there is cost there for the poultry industry, and that's why it's important that the poultry industry treats it with products that are effective. There's been lots of various treatments over the years, and certainly in my sort of couple of decades working with different products, I've sort of covered everything from products that physically restrict the red mites moving around, and we can talk about different types of those, insecticides, and now, you know, various products that we can actually affect the red mite as it feeds on the blood from the hens. So there's lots of different solutions out there, but the main thing really to think about is the application of any treatment. You know, if it's designed to try and kill the red mite, it's only going to work if it actually gets in contact with the red mite. So again, identifying if you've got a problem is the first spot, and then it's thinking about how you can tackle it if you do find one.
And I think that's partly the problem. There are so many different products on the market as well, particularly in the backyard market. It's a bit of a minefield to work out what actually, you know, has anything interesting in it, or whether it's simply what is just herbal. And I'm all pro herbal, you know, as an adjunct to things, but not as a replacement, to be honest. So that makes it quite difficult, and it's a real benefit to the backyard and pet guys that so much evidence and research does go into the commercial control products, because then at least we can use that research in the smaller setting as well. So we're very lucky really to be able to steal your information and use your products on smaller scales.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you say, usually if something's got a commercial gain for a company, then people invest in it, and then, like you say, it's then known about, which is which is useful for everybody.
Have you seen you can see the screen, I take it, and the eggs up there?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're the tiny little dots of red mite, the full stops that Wesley was talking about here. Sometimes you might see them on the eggs. Where's the best place to look for them then?
Well, it's a good point, Henry, because most of the red mite during the daytime will actually move off of the chicken and move onto the equipment or the chicken coop itself, and they'll hide away during the daytime so they don't get pecked at by the chickens. So if you've got, say, a wooden shed, for instance, you can find them, particularly if it's made of plywood. Red mite will, you know, love to crawl down in between the sheets of ply, you know, where the glue is. They'll hide in there during the daytime, and then at night, about 1 hour after it becomes dark, the red mite will start to move out of those harbourages, and then they'll go on to the bird to feed. They'll be on the bird for a couple of hours. Once they've fed, then they'll migrate back onto the equipment in the coop, and again away and out of sight. So often it's undiagnosed by, you know, the hen keeper, because you're there during the daytime and you don't really see anything. So you've got to be quite vigilant. Red mite will often sort of be near the perches, or basically anywhere where you've got two surfaces that are bolted together. And again, there's a picture or two later that we can you know, show as an example of where red mite might be. But while you've got this slide up, it might just be worth explaining to people a little bit about the red mite life cycle. So as with most things in the poultry industry, it starts with an egg. So if you have a red mite egg, the red mite eggs will take 2 to 3 days before they hatch. And when they hatch, they hatch into the larvae. Now, the larvae is very, very small. It's, like I say, translucent in colour. And if you look at it under a microscope, it has 6 legs. The larvae doesn't need to take any meal, doesn't take a blood meal, doesn't need any food. After 1 to 2 days, it then transfers into the stage called the proto-nymph. And at that proto-nymph stage, that's where it grows another 2 legs. And so it's an 8-legged little beast. And that's when it will take its first blood meal. After 1 to 2 days of taking that blood meal, it will transition into the next stage in the life cycle called a deutonymph. The deutonymph also then needs to take a blood meal in order to progress. And then she will progress into her adult state after 2 to 3 days. With adults, you've got males and females. The female will feed on poultry blood every 1 to 2 days. And then when she's fed, she will lay her eggs very, very quickly. So she'll lay her eggs within 12 to 24 hours, and she'll lay an egg. She'll lay a clutch of anything between 1 to 7 eggs. The adult, female adult, then will replicate that time and time again until she lays around 60 eggs in her lifetime. So, and this whole process can take as little as 7 to 10 days, particularly in the summer. So the temperature is important. That's why we see more of it in the summer. The warmer it is, the faster they breed. So typically people will see less of a challenge on their birds in their coop in the winter when it's colder, more in the summer. If we relate this or the poultry red mite back to nature, as I say, it's in the endemic bird population. So it's in sparrows, it's in pigeons. If you just think about that in sort of in the natural environment, take, you know, this time of year, you've got birds that are coming back into the hedgerows and building nests. When they're in that hedgerow, red mites will start to feed on the birds as they begin to build a nest, and they'll carry on that life cycle. But once the fledglings leave the nest and the food source goes, the red mite then sits without a host, without a meal, and the proto nymphs can last for at least 3 months without a blood meal, but we know the deuto nymphs will last easily 6 months without a blood meal.
It's amazing how that is.
Yeah, it's incredible. It just basically goes into like a hibernation, and the eggs will also remain completely valid. They're viable eggs, and the eggs will sit in the hedge, in the hedgerow, all winter. So it'll have the frost and the snow and the wind and the rain on there, but they won't damage. They'll wait until the spring, and then they'll rehatch, or then they'll hatch, and it will restart the life cycle. So that's why, if we sort of relate it back to people with their pet chickens, they may well have had a hutch that they've, or a coop that they've bought, a secondhand coop, and it may not have had chickens in it for a year, 6 months. Unfortunately, you can't then expect that there will definitely be red mite clear, because we see in the commercial world, even with sheds that have been left for a year, having been cleaned and washed down, on restocking a shed, we've then seen resurgences of red mites. So the visibility is really important. The people need to have a look and see whether or not there is any infestation in there.
That's amazing. And what sort of products would you use to clean like secondhand coops then? Because they're all up for a bit of upcycling, recycling, but what sort of products would you use to clean them with then?
To be honest, the easiest way is just initially, get a pressure washer and give it a blast and remove as much organic material off there, any dust, feathers, muck that's on there. That's always the best start. Remove as much organic material as possible, and then you can get a general purpose disinfectant that will disinfect and clean a lot of the bugs away from that coop. I think, there are various sort of chemicals that you can put on, but a lot of these chemicals, there's no need to use it if you genuinely don't think there's any red mite there. So I would, tend to stay away from just using chemicals for the sake of it.
And I much prefer using the diatomaceous earth generally than things like the permethrins as well, just from a resistance perspective. When you're not when you're using it preventatively rather than being convinced there's a problem.
Yeah. No, we can talk about the various different products as we go, but I've just seen a message come up where somebody sort of said, not quite sure what to look for, but if you click on, there's a slide with some photos on it, Henry.
I might have to find that for you because I didn't find that one, I don't think.
Okay.
No, I'll have a look.
Okay.
Have a look in the background.
It might be on, I think it's on.
I didn't copy them across properly, so
it's one of my most recent email, but
I'll find it.
yeah, but basically, the picture on the left obviously shows a red mite under a microscope. You can see it's got its 8 legs. Well, it doesn't really show it very clearly on the right side of it, but you can see from the left side that it's got its 4 legs down the side, and then the 2 look like sort of small legs at the front is where it sort of bites in and will take the meal.
That serves me right for trying to find it in the background, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Go. That's better.
That's fine. Well, what I'll do is I'll pass across to Kate, and I'll just ping you the that slide again, Henry. And
you should be able to share as well, because I made you a co-host. Because I just opened it again and I can't see it on there.
Okay.
Okay. Shall I talk about how to find mite? The way that I normally do it, in fact, the easiest way is with a little flashlight, with a little torch, and just have a look under the coop, have a look in the crevices, and you'll see them at night. In the day, if you've got any number of infestation, you'll see it almost looks like little sort of black or grey ash, and that's usually dead mite or mite feces. If you get a little piece of white paper and put it underneath the perch, put it in the nest box, and just sort of scrape around the surface, you'll see some mites coming onto that piece of white paper. But the easiest way that I use is just with a little torch, and it's usually nighttime is the best time to see them active. But as I say, if you've got any amount of mites at all, you'll be able to see them in the day as well. So just cracks and crevices, round nuts and bolts is a really good place as well, because they love any of those awkward little places.
And some people tell me, I haven't got them. I look at them first thing in the morning before the girls go out. I'd say that was too late, really. It needs to be after bedtime.
Yeah, they're active in the dark. Just be careful with your flashlight, because sometimes they can startle the birds a little bit.
They're frightening. How do you find the eggs? There's one question. I thought they were too small to find. I don't know.
I think they are a bit too small to see with the naked eye, but you'll see the baby nymphs, and you'll see the adult red mites. The baby nymphs are actually quite easy to see.
It is amazing the difference in sizes actually as well. So for example, like you've got some chunky one adults here, and actually you've got some really, really tiny little silver dots in the background as well. It's always amazing the variation in population sizes that you can get of them.
It's usually a good number. I always try to save them for people, but they usually whiz off the piece of paper before you can point them out. But it sounds a bit gross, but if you squish the adult ones, you'll see the blood.
I prefer using sellotape actually, as if I'm doing a veterinary tape strip. So I'll cut a length of sellotape and then just stick things with my fingers. Can everybody see Wesley's screen here?
Can you see that now?
Yeah, Katie, can you see that?
Yep, I can see it.
I assume everybody else can see that as well. Good, thank you.
Okay, so you can probably see on the
Oh, only meant to stop mine. Sorry, I forgot.
It's fine. So you can probably see on the left-hand picture what looks a bit like cigarette ash, really, and that's the mix of the red mite and also the sort of the feces that the red mite will make while they're clustered. The picture in the middle is some red mite that are actually on the feather of the chicken, so you can see they're just sort of very small specks, and what you'd be better off doing is sort of, touching them and getting them onto your hand and see if they're actually moving, because they can just be bits of dirt, but where the birds have dust bathed. So you'd be better off sort of actually looking closely. And as Kate said, if you were to flick them onto a piece of white paper, a piece of A4 white paper is really perfect, because then the red might start to move and you can see that they're on it. And also, even if you get say you had all the debris from the litter on the left hand picture, if you were to pick that up and to sprinkle it onto a white piece of paper and then literally tip the paper upside down and all the dust falls off, the red mite will hang on to that piece of paper. So it's very easy to see if you've got any doubt. Basically, if everything has fell off, then it was all just dust. So you can forget
That's a
that.
really good tip, actually. You can just imagine them clinging on, can't you?
Yeah, and they do. This is the strange thing. I just wonder if this will play. Can you see that?
Oh, isn't it creepy?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can
it's
actually see it
moving.
moving.
Okay. So yeah, you can actually see the red mite moving. Like I say, it's sort of in that dust area, and the chicken in the middle. Again, you can just sort of see. I don't know if you can just see the red mite moving around on the feather. If I play that again.
Oh yeah. The angles in that triangle. Yeah. Look at that.
Okay, and then I think this last
That was
one.
taken at night time.
Yeah, I hope you can see. Can you see that whole thing?
Oh yeah, the little red dots running up and down.
Yeah, so there's just like a piece of ply sheet. I'll just try and press that again. So there's a ply board there with where the birds have got the little nest box, and again you can just see those red mite moving around. So if you're in any doubt, actually the best time to go and have a look is about an hour after darkness. Go and have a poke around with a torch. Your birds will think it's a bit strange why you're going out there at night, but that's the best time to see if there's anything crawling around. Like I say, during the daytime, typically these the red mite, if it's a fairly low infestation, that they'll have hidden away. But that's hopefully useful for people just to sort of get an idea of what they may see in their coop. Thank
you. So we've talked about their life cycle and what they look like and how best to identify them. That paper trick is fabulous. I think everybody will be turning paper upside down from now on, won't they? But what? So do you use red mite traps and things as well for monitoring? I see some companies sell them to backyard and pet owners, but
yeah, again, in commercial settings, there's a few things on the market, and there's some the latest technology is moving into sort of artificial intelligence, where we look in with cameras onto the chicken, and you monitor the bird behavior, especially at night, because fundamentally at night the chicken should just be sitting quietly asleep on the perch, and very, very calm and quiet. Typically, if you've got a red mite infestation, there's a lot of head shaking at night, and there's a lot of self-preening, and the birds are sort of moving and itching because they're getting bitten. So it's a little bit like us going to bed with a bed full of bed bugs. You're never going to get a nice night's rest, and you're going to be constantly moving and rolling over it in bed. And that's the same with the chickens. So the latest sort of design or idea is that if we can use night vision cameras in a chicken shed, and see bird behavioral change, we can be able to detect that easily. But yeah, from a lot more basic level, we do use a lot of red mite traps in sheds. Now there's nothing complicated about a red mite trap at all. It's literally a plastic tube that's got about 25 mil wide. You cut a little bit of corrugated cardboard up, roll it up, and just pop that in the tube, and then you put that tube with the corrugated cardboard in the hen area, but the trick is where to put it. Again, a lot of people use them, but if you put them in the wrong spot, then you're going to blindly think, I haven't got any red mite, but it's just because you've put it in the wrong position. And what I recommend to people is you have to think like a red mite. It sounds crazy, but think about, if I was a red mite, where would I live where the chicken can't ever peck me during the daytime? Where it's going to be safe for me to lay my eggs, and to reside during the day? And then where is the chicken going to be sitting at night? Where's she going to be roosting? So a lot of times in a coop, there'll be a couple of perch rails, and the birds will always roost on the perch, preferably, rather than on the floor. So the red mite will walk along the side of the coop, and they'll walk onto the perch, and they'll walk along the perch, and then up the leg of the bird, and then feed. They'll then come down the bird, along the perch, and back to where they were living. So if you place the trap on the perch, or actually in a perfect world underneath the perch with a cable tie, then you've put the trap in the perfect spot for the red mite to go in. Now, what happens in reality is the red mite walks, from wherever it was living onto the perch. It walks past the trap and feeds, and then when it's finished feeding and on its way home, it then finds this trap, and we call it a trap, but it's just an alternative home for red mite to live in. And this alternative home is perfect because it's dark and secluded. The red mite can live in the corrugations of the cardboard, and the bird can't ever peck it. So the red mite thinks, great, I can lay my eggs in here, and the red mite pile into these corrugations in the cardboard. So there's no reason why people can't just make their own, at home and pop these in the coop. Now, again, commercially, we put the traps in for 48 hours, and then we have a look at the traps. And the reason why I put them in for 48 hours is simply then we've got 2 bites at the cherry where red mite can be moving and feeding, and then they go into this, this trap. Once they go in, again, we call it a trap. It's not a trap. The red mite are free to come and go as they wish, but they will be there during the daytime because that is a nice place for them to live. So again, it's very easy for a pet keeper just to open the trap, peel off the corrugations on the cardboard, just have a look. Essentially, if there's no red mite, it'll be dead clean. And if there's anything in there that even looks like specks of dirt, chances are they're red mite because they've actually crawled in. Little bits of dust and dirt wouldn't get into that cardboard. So that might be something that's of interest for people just to play around with.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And there are quite a few things I noticed on YouTube on how to make your own red mite traps. And it's worth just remembering that although we call them traps, they're not like you'd imagine a rodent trapping device. They very much come and go, and it's for monitoring and identification purposes rather than a control or elimination measure for red mite.
Yeah, it's an ideal home that you're giving them.
An ideal home.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Ideal Home show. Brilliant. Nice. So that's, I think, probably the best method for control, that and the white paper trick, most definitely. And then when you identify that you have some red mites, what are your sort of opinions on products to use? I mean, I really like the Exzolt, but equally I'm aware that until recently it wasn't easiest to get hold of for the backyard and pet, for my backyard and pet clients, because it is a prescription drug, isn't it? It's POMV, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And just to be clear, obviously Kate and I work for a company that promote it. We go and we use it and we sell it. The mode of action with that product is it's a simple chemical that the bird drinks in the water. So it's put in the drinking water. The bird drinks that, and then much the same as flea and tick treatments that people have on their dogs and cats. It's exactly the same in that when the parasite takes a meal of blood, then it dies. And I think the significance is in this case, the poultry red mite has to come to the product because the product is the food source. All of the other products pretty much, certainly the sprays, it relies on you getting the product onto the red mite. And that's always been the challenge, whether it's a coop with 3 chickens or a large commercial facility. You can get products that will kill the red mite sprays wise, but you've got to get the spray onto the red mite, and that's been the challenge so far. So other control methods, as you say, there's diatomaceous earths. There's quite a few different sort of silica dust type products on the market. They essentially, very simply, they are fossilized plankton, or if you like, calcium type products that when you look under the microscope, they almost look like broken up snail shells smashed into little pieces, and it forms a dust that the red mite, when the red mite walk through them, the sharp particles lacerate the waxy cuticle of the red mite, and the red mite dies because it desiccates, it dries out. So it's a very sort of a physical action. And it's a great product. What I would say is, it needs to be sort of applied frequently into the shed or into the coop. It's an easy to use product. So that's a good alternative too.
I do like the diatomaceous earth products a lot for prevention, really, rather than a cure. But I've seen quite a lot of debate on social media groups and things about the safety of it. My advice is always that, like any dust puffing around, you've got to be a little bit careful with them irritating the respiratory tract. So I always suggest doing it, after they laid their eggs in the mornings, and then leaving it open all day so the dust just settles before the hens go back at night. The last thing you want to do is put it in before nighttime when you're shutting them up in there.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think a good point on that is if the hens have got any respiratory problems and then you spray a lot of dust around them, it can really exacerbate the problem. It can make it worse. And also when you're using the diatomaceous earth, just make sure you wear a mask as well, because again, you don't want to be breathing that in.
Yeah, just as irritant. And don't put it on wet surface as well. Once you've cleaned your coop and disinfected it and things, don't then puff it onto wet surfaces, because I don't know whether it eventually dries out and works, or whether it just never dries out enough to work. But probably not a good idea. Wait for it to put on a dry surface. There's something come up in the chat. Someone just said they just use it in the crevices rather than on the general surfaces. What do you think about that, Katie? Or Wesley?
I think I would use it in the general surfaces as well. You almost want it almost like a dust bath. So nest boxes and certainly crevices as well, because that's where the mites will go. So obviously when they're going to the crevices, they'll injure themselves and then hopefully they'll die. But I would put it in other places in the coop as well, I think.
Sounds a little bit macabre, doesn't it? Bless them. But I like putting it in the dust bath as well. So at least the dust themselves with it go back home and redust the shed for you as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, Henry. I've used it on commercial free range flocks to great effect with in the dust bath. Like you say, the birds will bathe in it. It will be in their plumage, and then that night, as red mite come onto that bird, it creates a very, very hostile environment for that red mite to feed, and like I say, we'll hopefully kill that red mite as it comes onto the bird. The one thing I would say is, again, thinking about sort of bird behavior, I found it to be very, very effective with young birds if you put it into the litter, and the birds will play. I think of chickens a bit like people, that when they're very young, it's like teenagers willing to experiment, try all new stuff. It's all exciting. If you give it to a bird that's 50 weeks old, they're very set in their ways, and they look at it and think, not doing that. That's not what I do. And they won't dust bathe in it. So again, if it's something that you bring in and integrate it into the litter, give it some substance, put it in with the shavings on the floor, then the birds will be a lot keener to use it to dust bathe in.
That's a good tip. Young birds play more. So we've had another question about if Exzolt is very much like flea treatment, is there nothing that's not prescription? And I think the answer is that the products for dogs and cats that have the Fluralaner, I can never say, in are prescription only anyway, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
So it's because Fluralaner itself everything that's got that in it is prescription only, and that is why there aren't any dog or cat treatments in it really either that are not prescription. That's the problem. And why is it POMV rather than an SPC or anything? Ignore my annoying acronyms, but why is it a vet only rather than a qualified pet shop product?
Kate, do you want to go with that?
I think
no, don't give it to me. Take it back.
Don't give it to me.
I don't want that question.
No, it's fine. I'll take it. It's mainly because with poultry we eat the eggs, so it had to go through the European Medicines Agency to get the license. With all sort of food production animals, these type of products now are sort of very, very highly regulated. It took 5 years to go through the approvals and the testing to gain that license. So all sort of, or the vast majority of modern products coming to the market have that highest level of regulation around it. So that's why it's a prescription only medicine that only sort of veterinary surgeons can prescribe.
I can't actually think of any poultry products that have a really true sort of medicinal action that are not POMV actually. So yeah, it must be a food producing species thing, isn't it? They're just very cautious.
Yeah, the only ones that are not are about 30 years old. Certainly in the last sort of 20 years, there's been nothing that's licensed with POM VPS or similar.
One question that frequently comes through to us is, can we just crumble up a little bit of Brevector, which is the dog and cat version, and feed it in a tiny quantity to the chicken? The answer is, even though it's a similar product, the answer would be definitely not, because the one designed for dogs and cats has a much longer duration of activity compared with Exzolt. Exzolt's only designed to be in the bird's bloodstream for about 21 days. You don't really want it persisting much longer than that. So it's a much higher strength in dogs and cats. So don't do that.
And the Exzolt is it's got a 0 egg withdrawal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's quite right.
So if it was a persistent product, then it would have been found in the egg. Whereas at the levels they're putting it in Exzolt, then it's not found.
Yeah, so you're effectively treating the environment for 3 weeks, and in that time it's at a high concentration for 2 weeks, and then the following week after that it goes into decline, and in that time hopefully every single mite has fed.
I understand that we can now get them in syringe in a multi-dose and dispense as per syringe, can we now as vets? Or is that just
yes, you can
here as well? So I personally don't stock it because I don't have enough clients who want it from me, if that makes sense. But I think once vets realize that actually a lot of people do want it, then they'll start to stock it. But we're also worried about buying an expensive bottle and it going off on the shelf because not enough people want syringes of it. So I think
I think from that perspective, the product's got a long shelf life. Even once the product was opened, it's good for 12 months. So you've got effectively 12 months to use that product. But yeah, one small bottle is enough for 250 chickens. So like you say, in a practice, some practices will have clients that will use that fairly quickly, and others will, like you say, need to tell their clients that this is an option now.
And how often would I tell clients to use it?
That's a good question. We would perceive that potentially customers may decide to use it twice a year, because, like I say, there is this sort of constant sort of threat that you may get a reinfestation. So we would perceive that customers that would use it and would think, okay, that was dead easy to use, but I don't want red mite on my birds. May use it in the springtime, and then that would take out that mite population and go through the summer, and then use it again in the autumn. Which again, if there was a reinfestation, that would knock that out completely. get a clear status and then go through the winter with no mite population too. So just two treatments in that year.
So that answers one of the questions about can it be used in preventative relief then? What about the site?
Well, yeah, I was going to say just to touch on that, Henry.
Yeah.
The product is a it's a control product, so it's not like, you wouldn't take a paracetamol today in case I get a headache tomorrow, because the paracetamol is not going to do you any harm, but it's not going to solve a problem. So if you haven't got red mite, then there is no need to treat for red mite. It's not a preventative product. So the best advice is to monitor, have a look. If you think that you have got red mite, take some advice from your vet. You can put them in a little pot, take them into your vet and show them, or you could probably self-diagnose just looking on the internet at what does a red mite look like.
Yeah.
If you really haven't got red mite, you could use Exzolt, but it's there isn't a great deal of value in doing it, because it's not going to prevent a red mite infestation from coming into your hens in the future.
I think there was a question on the chat there about does it treat other species as well. It's actually licensed for northern fowl mite. Now they look quite similar to red mite, but they actually live on the bird. So they're the kind of things, if you lifted a bird and there was a lot of mites on them, that would be northern fowl mite. Also, we get questions, is it effective against lice? We've never had a claim against that because we haven't actually done the testing, but we sort of find in the field that if birds are concurrently affected with lice, and it's not a common problem in commercial birds, but it is something that I used to see quite a lot in backyard or pet birds, and it does seem to be effective against lice as well. I think that's because some of the lice suck on the blood and eat the feathers, and there's obviously a little bit of the product must get into the feather follicles, so it's quite effective against those as well.
Back to diatomaceous earth again. This question about wood ash. Does wood ash help? I didn't think so, and I would be a little bit worried with how light ash is and how easy it is to breathe in, that actually you could trigger some respiratory diseases. So I personally do not recommend wood ash. I'd say keep it for your fruit trees instead, or your bulbs instead. I would personally say.
I'd also completely agree that there's no physical action of the wood ash that would lacerate the cuticles. That it wouldn't work to damage the red mite in any way.
And how about putting Vaseline on the crevices to try and trap the mites? I mean, I think considering how well they get out of my sellotape, I'm a bit suspicious. But I don't know if you've ever tried.
Yeah, I've not used Vaseline, but I've certainly used, or I'm conscious of people that have used grease, around the hinges, particularly on a coop, and that can be very, very effective. And it's just physically the red mite just gets stuck in it, and that's it. They can't move through it. What I would say though is you've got to be very, very careful. It needs to be applied with a paintbrush, just gently. Otherwise, if you dob it all around, your chickens end up pecking it, they'll ingest it, it'll be on their feathers, you can make a right mess. So you have to just be careful, but essentially there's no reason why it wouldn't work, but you would have to probably clean it off and then replenish it quite regularly.
And
sorry, Pam, you go on.
No, go, Katie.
just looking at the questions coming up, there was one I saw on scaly leg mite there, and is it effective against that? One of our vets thinks yes. Now, on the subject of Vaseline, I used to always put Vaseline on those scaly leg problems, and it seemed to suffocate the mites doing that.
Yes, I have too. I quite like that. And other products that have this a similar mode of action. Does certain bedding types more risk factors for more of a red mite habitat? So, for example, shavings versus wood chip versus straw.
I would say we've seen it from straw quite often, and I don't know whether that's because wild birds go to where the straw is kept, and then the straw goes into the sheds for enrichment. So definitely it can appear out of the straw.
Yeah, the straw also physically is perfect because it's like little tubes, isn't it? So it's perfect for them to live in, whereas the shavings, it's obviously harder for a red mite to find somewhere nice to live in. So if you've got a red mite infestation, the straw certainly won't help.
Yeah. So maybe swap to shavings if you have a red mite infestation.
Yeah, it could help. Yeah.
How much diatomaceous earth would you add to a dust bath?
You can be quite liberal with it. I mean, like I say, from my sort of very practical experience, if you put it in as pure, diatomaceous earth, the chickens don't tend to enjoy it much because it's got no surface tension. And again, when you stand and watch a chicken, I'll tell you my story. How this started off was somebody wanted 3 or 4 old free-range chickens for their garden. And I said, yeah, that's fine. They can have them. So they took these chickens.
Watch it. You're going to get lots of contacts after this.
They took them round to this lady's house and give them to her in a garden. And the chickens ran straight across and jumped straight into her children's sandpit, and started dust bathing. And the next day I was stood in the chicken shed and I was thinking, do you know what, this is perfect. I need to make some sand pits for my birds, and then if I put the diatomaceous earth in the sand pit, this is going to be great. So I set to town and made some sand pits that are about sort of 1 meter by 1 meter wide, poured in 25 kilos of diatomaceous earth, and then basically sat in my shed for an hour and just watched my birds. They took a while to sort of have a look, and they'd sort of jump on the side of the sand pit, and then the first birds that jumped in it immediately jumped out, and they were absolutely frightened of it. And why that was because when they jumped into the powder, their feet went straight through it, and they were expecting it to be solid. Their feet went straight through, and it's a bit like when you walk down the stairs in the dark and then you think that you're on the bottom step and then there's another one and you suddenly think, oh, and your heart goes. And the chickens reacted exactly the same. So, and those birds wouldn't then go back into that dust. So what I then ended up doing is putting some straw into it. And I put a bale of straw in and kicked it round and really put some body into that dust. And then again, you stand back and you observe the birds, and then they were much happier because when they jumped in it had got some body, it got some tension. And then the birds were happy to dust bathe in it. So again, you can learn everything by just reading the birds, but you just have to know how to read them, and just sit and watch. And people with pet chickens, they'll be watching them all the time. They'll watch their personalities. And so that's why, I'd be quite liberal with it, but mix it in with some substrate, mix it in with some shavings or something else, and then the birds will really enjoy it. And you'll see that they in commercial terms, these birds were basically queuing up to get in it during the daytime. And they sort of build their social circle where they jump in, they dust bathe, and then the next ones are sort of stood waiting. It's almost like they're stood at the side of the swimming pool and they dust bathe, and then they get out and another one jumps straight back in. And when it's a fairly limited resource, birds will sort of spend a small amount of time in and get out. Again, just to sort of elaborate on this, what I found is if you have too much resource, then the birds love it so much they decide to lay their eggs in it. And that was the next sort of disaster, my next learning curve.
Oh no.
That is not good if you're trying to sell the eggs. So then what I had to do is I had to shut down and reduce the size of the sand pit for them. And then I made it so it's a very small resource for several thousand chickens, and then they couldn't spend so much time in it that they could lay their egg, because it wasn't comfortable, because somebody else wanted to jump in on top of them. Think of it like the toilets at Glastonbury. If there's a queue of 200 people, nobody spends any longer in there than they need to. They get in, do their business, and then get out. And it was the same with chickens. So if you're going to do it with your pet chickens, if you make it too comfortable for them, they'll probably think, do you know what, I love laying my eggs in here, and you'll end up just having to pick all your floor eggs up forever.
And although, I mean, it sounds trivial, but actually the public health implications potentially of floor eggs are not good, especially when you've got kids at home and you're putting these eggs straight in your fridge. So try and doing anything you can to try and make sure that those eggs are being laid in nice clean nest boxes, and the shells are clean and completely free of feces is the most healthy thing for everyone to be doing at home. So it may sound like a trivial farm thing, but actually it's really important because they are food producing species, remember. I assume Sarah is a vet here on the chat. She's asked what the smallest sizes practices can buy. I thought it was the 250 bottle, but it comes with the syringes and the bungs, does it?
Yeah, it comes with 50 mil, which is enough to do 250 birds. But it comes with a dispensing kit. So you just basically draw off the small amount that the client needs for their few chickens, and you can give it with those syringes basically. So you send them away with the full kit and the instructions of how to do it. And it's very simple. It's only 2 doses, 7 days apart. So if you treat today on Saturday, you give it next week on Saturday as well. And it's just simply you squirt it into the to the day's water that the birds will drink, and just give it a mix and let the birds drink it.
And how do you recommend people work out how much water their bird's going to drink in that day?
It's a good question. What I tend to do is, well, you can either work out on the basis that a chicken drinks about 210 ml per day. So that's how much a chicken actually drinks.
You're like a mind full of data, aren't you, Wesley?
Sadly, yes. But if I suppose the point is, you don't want it to waste the product. So again, if you've got a font drinker or something, mix up a relatively small amount of water, and then leave that water for the birds until they've actually drunk it all, rather than mix it in a big font drinker and then you end up chucking most of it away. You want the birds to actually drink the product, so give it in a relatively small amount of water. Ideally, we would like the birds to drink it over a period of between 4 hours and 24 hours. So that's
broad then, really, isn't it?
It's very broad.
Half a day's water quantity, give or take, and then a half day check it, and then they can always when it runs out, replace it with some fresh, so at least you knew it was getting in rather than being wasted and underdosing.
That's it. It's very simple and easy to do.
Underdosing is more risky with a resistance perspective than overdosing with any clinic side effects. Yeah,
there's again, in our all the trials, we massively overdosed the birds, and there were no adverse effects at all on the bird or bird welfare, bird appetite, water consumption, feed consumption, hatchability for breeders. All of the parameters that we tested, there were no adverse effects from any potential overdosing. But again, your vet would only prescribe you what you needed. So I think that there would be very, very low chance of any sort of over administration.
I think Sarah's made a good point there. Just remember that for low ranking hens perspectives, having 2 drinkers, medicating 2 drinkers is better than just expect them all to drink out of one, because otherwise the bullies might get the lot and the lower hens may not. So that's a good point. I mean, that applies to most things really, and whether or not people have 4 or more hens, 4 or less hens, I'd still recommend 2 drinkers, because you do always get the bullies as well. So it's a very good point there. Some people still use Frontline even after the massive media coverages, and and because it is so easily available. What is the problem with using Frontline?
The active ingredient in Frontline is fipronil. fipronil basically has a very long persistence in the bird and in the egg. So you have a residual amount of fipronil in the egg, and that's not healthy for us to eat. So simply that's why fipronil will never get a license to be used in a food production animal. It's fine in a dog and cat because we don't eat dogs and cats. But if you're putting it in a food production animal, it's not clever. So yeah, I would strongly recommend against that.
And 210 mils per water per day is what you said, not 220.
Yeah, about 210 is again, if the chicken's actually drinking it, what you've got to be careful of with your backyard hens is, that they're not just splashing a lot around. You might look at it and think, oh, well, actually I give my birds 300 mil, but it might be that it's a font drinker and they splash a lot of it around, but what they'll actually drink is around about 210.
And they are the harder working commercial bird as well. So if you have some quite lazy chickens or some bantams, it's probably going to be a little bit less, unless it's summer.
Yes.
And hot.
Yeah. I'm working on a chicken that weighs about 1.9 kilos. So if a bantam will drink a bit less. If you've got a Buff Orpington, it'll drink a bit more. Yeah.
I've always wanted a nice flock of Buff Orpingtons.
Look pretty.
I know, I'd always loved it. Nice, big, chunky things to hold. That'd be wonderful. Has anybody got any more questions for Wesley and Katie? No, doesn't look like it. Are there any other? I mean, I've seen some like the permethrin products. Is there anything else that the farms use that's got some decent evidence behind it? That's sort of not a veterinary, if you don't really want to put medicine into your birds, then what other options apart from diatomaceous earth are there?
There are some, cypermethrins, permethrins, that you can buy. Again, a lot of them won't have a claim for red mite, mainly because red mite is a relatively small, market. I don't know. I don't know enough, honestly, about the different brands that are designed for backyard, flock keepers.
Oh yeah. Active ingredients, if any, not brands. Yeah, but
I think a lot of them have been banned, actually. I remember the days when I was in clinical practice, people sprayed coops with Deosect, and I don't think you can even get it now.
But I'm not sure that people need to anymore, actually, so long as the husbandry is good, they're keeping them clean and they're monitoring them well. And I think actually most of the time it is quite avoidable, to be honest. There's just to confirm, no, there's no egg withdrawal period to using Exzolt. There's a question about plastic versus wood. Now, I prefer any surface that is not a very good red mite habitat. So if it's got lots of nooks and crannies in it, then that's not going to be ideal. So a plastic coop with lots of nooks and crannies will be just as bad as a wood one. Whereas some of the heavily yacht varnished wood coops that have got very few nooks and crannies are actually going to be pretty safe. So I think it's more about the quality of the surface rather than whether it's specifically made of plastic or wood. But unless you've got anything else to say on that.
No, it's also the simplicity, the fewer areas where you've got two bits butted up together, the fewer areas you've got for red mite to potentially live. So I know a lot of I think they're called igloos and these sort of new, houses for chickens. They've been designed specifically with red mite in mind. So everything's sort of rounded and the things are, there's a minimal number of areas to hide in.
They're very easy to clean as well, those. They are brilliant for that, aren't they?
Yeah. There's one question I've just seen. I've heard that steam can kill them. Steam can, if you use enough of it, but again, you can steam clean it, but they're pretty hardy. I don't know how you'd sort of or what equipment you've got to actually sort of fire steam into it.
Must be something from the Lakeland catalogue, I would suggest.
Yeah, something
Definitely something in there.
Clean the grout off your tiles and stuff. So yeah, if you've got something like that, yeah, that would probably be great. But yeah, I mean, you'd have to be really persistent and burn them out effectively with the steam. So not sure how practical that is for most people.
And I think the steam will also quite rapidly cool. So if you've still got lots of organic material, lots of dust, feather, fluff, dander, bits around wood chip, then the steam is not going to penetrate into those crannies where the red mite is safely housed. So you would have to spotlessly clean first to give the steam any chance, I'd have thought, even if you're using the Lakeland equipment.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that heat treatment can kill red mite. And again, commercially, not in the UK, but in Holland, they do some heat treatment. But that is, you basically have to take the whole chicken coop or poultry shed up to a temperature of 50 degrees Celsius. And that's 50 degrees at the coldest spot. So the concrete has to be 50 degrees. The top of the shed would be 70 degrees. And you have to hold it at that temperature for 48 hours. I've done it on some units, but it is extremely expensive because it takes 3 days to build the temperature up. So you've got to put the heat in for 3 days to build the temperature up. And that's because the wood expands at different rates to the metal and different rates to the plastic. So you have to very, very slowly build the heat. You then hold the heat for 48 hours at that temperature, at a minimum of 50 degrees in the coldest spot. And then you have to take 3 days to cool the shed down. If you go any faster, stuff doesn't contract at the same speed, and you start to turn everything on and realize that you've broken your whole farm. As a result, it does work, it's effective, but it's extremely expensive and
not very sustainable either, to be honest, with the amount of energy required.
It's not one for the
no.
for sustainability, global sustainability, I don't think either. Yeah.
Getting up to the final few questions here. In terms of sprays, would a general flea spray be useful? I mean, most of the general flea sprays are for the environment, not the pet, and they tend to be permethrin based. But considering that these are food producing species, I would avoid using general flea sprays and stick to something that's specifically for poultry and pay attention to whatever it says.
Just another comment on that one, actually. If you're thinking of something like a claim or indirects, which you would use if you had a problem with dogs or cats and you wanted to treat the carpets, I'm nearly sure that there's a warning on that you've got to remove fish and birds from the environment before you spray it. So I actually use that in my car because oftentimes while leaving the farm, when there's been a heavy contamination of red mite, I'm aware that I might be carrying some of the red mite home in my hair. And one time in my phone, there were a couple of ones. So I usually do treat the car and I use indirects for that, but I wouldn't use it near the birds.
Good tip. And finally, someone's saying, if you're not using the chickens for food, I assume they mean, i.e. not eating the eggs, can you use those dog and cat treatments? I think the answer legally is still no, because whether or not they're food producing species for you, they are still legally classed as food producing species, even if you're a vegan. Unless you can shed more light on that.
I would agree. Avoid.
Yeah, I think from a technical front, you're absolutely right, Henry, that shouldn't be permitted. It's also bad practice because somebody at some point might eat those eggs, and if you start and use the dog and cat products, you do not know. Well, for a start, you're going to put in far more active ingredient than you're intending, and you will never know quite at what point those eggs do become safe to eat. So and like I say, if somebody else takes the eggs and eats them, then you're not aware of what's in them. So yeah, it would be bad practice to do that.
Have you ever tried using those parasitic mites?
Yes, you get predator mites.
Sorry, yeah.
So they're predators. So there are some red mite, or effectively, yeah, other creepy crawlies that will go around and eat the red mite. They're not that effective they're not effective in a cage environment, because frankly the red mite are small and they live all the way up there, and then a big fat predator walks around and can't actually crawl up to eat them. On a very fundamental reason, that's why they don't work there. On a free range scenario, some people do find them, effective, certainly effective at maintaining a relatively low population, but you've got to put the predator mites in and you've got to reseed the environment multiple times, because again, with any natural predation, it's a case of you need enough food, prey for the predators to do well. If there's too many predators, there's not enough food, they die off. So if
they arrive in a large tub. I don't think anybody would like to handle them, really.
I'm going to be going down the road of greenhouse spider mite, predator mites this year, because I had such an infestation last year. And it looks such a faff when I read it. Got to do it so many times every 6 weeks. And I'm like, this is expensive and a faff. So I'll be able to tell you what it's like at the end of the year. How useful is cleaning with poultry shield? Do you know, against mites?
Yeah, it can work. It can be beneficial. Effectively, the reason why it's beneficial is poultry shield is pretty much a detergent. Yeah, and the reason why it works is the detergent basically coats the red mite, and on the middle of the back of the red mite is a thing called a spherical, where it breathes through. So it's basically breathing through that hole, and what the poultry shield does is it covers that hole, and then the red mite can't breathe. So again, if it's applied in sufficient volume and you coat these red mite, it can have some beneficial effects. It can reduce the population, but again, it comes back to the quality of the administration. The application is thorough enough, and again, you should do it multiple times. In fact, that probably leads me on to the bit that I'd really recommend. If somebody's using a treatment like that, they should absolutely go back again 7 to 10 days later and reapply the same product, because what you'll have done is, even if you were amazing and you killed everything that was walking around, you got to think of the red mite eggs that will hatch out, and in a week's time you'll have this new population in your shed or in your coop. So the best scenario is to apply, a treatment, and then go again in 10 days time and recoat, and then again a third time in 7 to 10 days later as well. So yeah, a sort of a gold standard approach, if you're using that technique, is to go multiple times with a 7 to 10 day window, probably 7-day window in between those 3 treatments, and that can be useful.
That's a good tip, thank you. And one last thing I think about ants. Someone noticed that ants are eating their red mites. Cool, lucky you, I say. Brilliant. That's fantastic.
Yeah, park the coop over an ant's nest.
Exactly, yeah.
Could be useful. Yeah.
Use ant powder.
Personally, I've never heard of that, but I don't doubt it. It makes sense. The ants may do that.
Right, so I'm just going to share my summary screen here. So thank you very much to Katie and Wesley for that. I realise we've run over time. We run over time every time, to be honest, but that's just because there's just so much to talk about. I mean, you can do whole day conferences on red mite alone, and we're trying to squash it in an hour, so it was a bit inevitable that we were going to go over. But I do hope all that was helpful. I think we've answered everyone's questions, which is good. So they live a long time on surfaces, and you can have red mite resurgences even after coops have been empty for a year. So don't be lulled into false senses of security. And do remember that that garden birds can be hosts for them as well. So you're unlikely to ever keep it away forever. So it's really important to keep monitoring. And those red mite traps, especially the homemade ones, there are some videos on YouTube how to make them, are a really good idea. trying to keep them at bay, removing as much organic material as possible is definitely essential, I'd say. Trying to make sure you clean regularly and you clean very well at the time. So yes, thank you very much.